my wife grew up here, and I think
Leave the flower unsmashed.
Because even the minimum wage.
like obviously they'll still need to do that stuff. Like that's what Nick does.
But I mean, property taxes, especially insurance, like more than
I tried.
property insurance.
I was
So
actually really
if you
good at
can
it,
get it.
but like I was so
Get
tall.
flood insurance or you can't afford what they have.
I didn't like at a
And they
certain
don't
point.
pay
I don't like
claims
looking at
when
a
you
computer
get
screen
it.
like that.
Good morning. Please rise in body or spirit and join me as we sing our new opening hymn for the month. It's called Sacred Circle, and the choir will lead us.
Entering into a sacred circle, entering into a sacred space, I will open my heart and quiet my mind, for the blessings about to unfold, for the blessings about to unfold. I am entering into a sacred circle, entering into a sacred space. I will open my heart and quiet my mind, for the blessings about to unfold, for the blessings about to
Good morning. My name is Ambra. I'll be the worship associate today, and my pronouns are she and her. Our opening words is by Reverend Scott Taylor, and it's called The Whisper of Our Souls. Come, let us listen with new ears. Do you hear it? That voice so familiar, yet still far. Less a longing and more a knowing. A whisper of something inside that seems to have known us longer than we've known it. Come, let us listen together.
Thank you, Ambra, who stepped in at the last minute to be our worship associate as Petra could not join us today. My name is Heather Norby. I'm the spiritual life director for this fantastic congregation, and I'm so grateful to be with all of you this morning. I use the pronouns she and her. In order to build this community, we need love plus connection, and that will lead to spiritual and ethical transformation. This is your community, and so we ask that you please be an active part of it by joining us in the following activities and events, supposing that we don't get hit by a hurricane, but I think we are right in its path. So, this Wednesday we probably won't be having popcorn theology. You never know, Adam's in charge, so if he decides to show up, he would like to show the Disney Pixar movie Soul. If we do have to cancel it, we'll just postpone it and we'll watch the movie another night. After service today is our starting point class. This is for newcomers. This is our second session, and also it's for everyone. Everyone's invited to come to learn more about Unitarian Universalism, about this church, and about one another. Did you buy your dinner theater tickets yet? Yeah, I see some yeses. I see some. Well, the dinner theater, it's called the Classic Monster Dinner Theater this year, and it's on October 19th, which is a Saturday. This is a joint fundraiser. It's for us and for the Red Tent Initiative. It's going to be lots of fun. There'll be some great performances. There's going to be some food and some drinks and costumes and dancing. So please get your ticket. The link is in the newsletter or on the Red Tent website. And if you don't want to buy a ticket and you'd rather volunteer, we do need volunteers. And I do have a sign-up sheet. We need people for decorating and setup. We need people to help prepare food. We need servers. And we, of course, need people to help clean up. So I have a clipboard. Please see me after service if you would like to help. Would you be interested in joining a UU Christian group here at UUCL? I've had some people tell me that they are interested in forming one. Tim raised his hand. You can contact Tim, or you can contact Helen in the office at contact@uuclakeland.org. The Social Justice Committee, which is currently Sherry and I, are working on the UUA Climate Justice Revival Program. We also do not have a budget, so at the end of this month, on October 27th, we will be taking up a special project collection. So when we pass the plate, please be generous, because half of that will go into our social justice fund. If you're interested in music, we practice here in the sanctuary on, look at these people, aren't they awesome? We practice every Saturday at 4 p.m. here in the sanctuary. So let us know if you would like to come join us. You do not have to know how to sing or play an instrument, okay? We just like to have fun. It's vibes. It's all about the vibes here. Thank you, Isaiah. And I would like to give a great big thank you to the folks that worked First Friday. I know Jen and Vaisel, Ken and Dorothy were probably there, Crystal, Isaiah, right? Thank you for going out to First Friday. We appreciate that, doing that hard work. And also, yesterday was a Buildings and Grounds work day, so thank you to everybody who showed up for that. Dustin, Ken and Dorothy, Crystal. Dustin's children. Yep, Dylan and Wyatt, thank you. We definitely appreciate all the work you do around here and make it look good. All right. And of course, please check the back of your order of service and our e-newsletter, which is published on Mondays, for more information. Let us light our chalice.
Let us create our sacred space by lighting our chalice, the symbol of our Unitarian Universalist faith, remembering that love is the power that holds us together and is at the center of our shared values. We are accountable to one another for doing the work of living our shared values through the spiritual discipline of love. Sage, would you please do us the honor of lighting our chalice? Please rise in body or spirit as we sing hymn number 123, Spirit of Life.
I would like to invite our children forward, or our young and young at heart. Come on up. We're going to do something a little bit different today. What is it? Well, we're gonna listen, which of course you always do, right? But today we're going to practice deep listening. What does that mean? Well, oh, that's Presley. Deep listening. Like when you're underwater?
Like when you look somebody in the eyes.
Like when you look somebody in the eyes? Listening to you. Well, I think that Jason has some stuff for us to listen to, and I don't really know what it is, so we're going to have to take a deep breath and quiet our voices and listen deeply. Are you ready? Fire? Is it fire? You hear cicadas? What is it? Like your dog chewing on a stick. What do you hear? Fire. You hear fire too. Okay. Okay, Jen's really listening deeply. Like she hears like the propane fueling the fire. A mountain stream? You've been camping before? Do you hear the fire? And the cicadas and the crickets? Wow. Marshmallows? Do the marshmallows make noise? You roast them on the fire. Can you hear them roasting? Do we have any other sounds? Yeah, oh. Oh look, you all were right, it was a fire.
Quit making fun of me. I hear you over there snickering.
She's deeply listening, I told you. All right. Wait, what's that? A stream, a creek, a waterfall? Sink water? Stream? musicians laughing? A horse? Oh wait, shh. Presley, here's a horse. I don't know, Jason, what do we have? We have a string. Is there a horse in there? Look, I think there's a horse back there in the background. What do you think? Yeah. Yeah. All right, do we have anything else, or is that, yeah, we do. Hold on, Jason's got something else for us. Okay, listen. Wind? So the tides, or the waves, it's because of the moon. So when you hear the ocean, do you also hear the moon? What if you're listening deeply? There it is. What's in the ocean? What's in the sea animals, plants, dolphins. If you deeply listen, can you hear them too? You can. All right. Is that what all you have for us? Thank you, Jason. Thank you. So what I want you to do when Dad, can I have a translation? No. Listen, she was listening deeply, and in the water, she heard something. She heard it. When we listen deeply, sometimes we hear things that maybe go beyond just what we think we're hearing, right? So when you go out into the world, I want you to listen carefully and think about all the things that you're hearing. And then come back and tell me later, okay? Okay, cool. All right, we're ready. Thank you. Bye. Have fun. Thank you for listening. Ambra, would you mind, or please light the healing candle for me. It's on the corner today. I've talked to many of you this week, and it seems like it's been kind of a rough couple of weeks for a lot of people. So I light the candle today calling upon the spirit of life and love to fill us with compassion, to keep us strong, to keep us safe. I know that a lot of us have anxiety about the upcoming storm. And I think that we can just take a moment to be grateful that we have this community, we have one another. If we need something, we know we can reach out. And so I'm thankful for the spirit of life and love that moves within us and in between us, keeping us together and letting us move forward. And so this is the time when we participate in our ritual of the sharing of joys, concerns, and sorrows, because it embodies the belief that there is power in being together and in holding one another in the significant, the precious, the hard, and the joyful moments of our lives. In our Joys and Sorrows book, you are able to write any significant joy or sorrow occurring in your life that you would like for the congregation to know. It sits on the table at the entrance of the sanctuary before the service, and then I read from it before we take time to participate in our weekly ritual of placing pebbles in the bowl. Let's see. A joy from Dorothy. She's, of course, thanking the buildings and grounds workers. Take these. Should have gotten bifocals, y'all. Okay. She says, we could not have accomplished what we did without Dustin, Wyatt, and Dylan. They helped take down the tree, clean the shed roof, paint the ceiling. Wow. And Maria and Steve also helped. And Crystal never stopped working, because Crystal just doesn't ever stop working. Thank you, Crystal. And Dorothy says, it does my heart good. And Tom mowed the grass. Thank you. And Dustin says that he's happy to have his family here with him, and we are also happy that you have your family here. Joshua Sussman's sibling is in the hospital on life support after a heart attack last night. So please keep Joshua and Petra in your thoughts. Petra asks that we hope or pray or whatever is suitable for us for the best possible good. Crystal says, my heart is heavy with sorrow seeing the horrible devastation in North Carolina. Yes, indeed. My heart is full of gratitude for the volunteers who are working to help those in need near and far around the world. Yes, thank you, and thank you, Crystal.
And we do plan to replace the tree that we took down.
Okay,
In case anybody was concerned.
good.
There will be new life.
There will be new life, and that gives us hope. And there was this beautiful plumeria flower in the book, so thank you.
It's growing quite well.
Okay. It's back on the playground, right? Yeah. We have a beautiful plumeria tree back there giving us beautiful flowers and hope on the playground. Last week, I wasn't in great shape. I told you all I was hit by a car, and I'm recovering. I'm still having some pain. I do have another health concern that I'm dealing with. I'm happy to talk to any of you after the service if you have questions. I'm not going to go into details. It's not an emergency. It's not life-threatening. As the doctor says, it's just an annoyance. So I'll be okay, but I probably just won't be myself for a few months. So just so you know. Just so you know. I'll be keeping it together as best I can, and but I'll also be looking at all of you for help, keeping us afloat here. So thank you. And yeah, I need hugs. All right, we all do. We all do, and I hope that you all stay safe this week and have a plan for the storm that's coming in. And I'm just so glad that so many of you are here today, because I was thinking everyone's going to be at home like preparing for the hurricane. So thank you for coming out and being together. I'll do that tomorrow. So I invite you now to come forward and place a colored stone representing your joys, concerns, and sorrows into the bowl of water. Each stone that we drop into the water represents a different thing that you may need in the midst of this moment. You may take whichever stone or stones feel right to you and drop it in the water, connecting to each other, feeling the power of being together in this community. Jason, do we have anyone on Zoom today?
We have Judy Pell on tonight.
Judy? Okay, thank you. Petra, Judy. Thank you.
Here we gather, tucked back in this friendly neighborhood between the beautiful tall pines. We are a community of people who have arrived from many different paths, yet we seek a common goal: to bring more love to a hurting but beautiful world. As Unitarian Universalists, we aspire to reach this goal through our shared values, one of which is the value of equity. To embrace equity, we declare that every person is inherently worthy and has the right to flourish with dignity, love, and compassion. And we covenant to use our time, wisdom, attention, and money to build and sustain fully accessible and inclusive communities. Our ushers will now pass the plate so that we may live into our value of equity.
Thank you. Let us take a few moments to center and to contemplate that which we are exploring this month, the practice of deep listening. Let's take some breaths together. Slowing down our anxieties about the week. And just remembering to be here right now together. One more big breath. And then relax. Close your eyes if it's helpful. And let's ponder some questions. What does it mean to be a good listener? Can you think of the people in your life who have been good listeners for you? What made them a good listener? And what was the result of their good listening? Do you think that you are a good listener? But what does it mean to listen deeply? Deep might imply going beyond the surface, listening that goes beyond just simply listening to the words being spoken to you. Deep listening is more than just hearing a sound. Perhaps deep listening means listening also for feelings, emotions, concerns, joys, values. Perhaps it means listening for a story hidden between the lines. Does deep listening mean listening to the person and also listening to the spirit of life, love, and or God within that person? Does deep listening mean listening that connects you to the interdependent web of all existence? What does deep bring to mind for you? Maybe deep space, the deep ocean, or deep into the earth? I want to share with you this poem and image I came across the other day on social media, as it helped me to imagine what deep listening could look like. The poem that goes with it is by someone who calls herself the Wild Matryoshka. And the image is by an unknown artist, maybe even AI. She writes, "In the northern hemisphere, 'tis the season to listen to the great below, the quiet knowing, the still strength, the deeper tune, the primal self, the essence, the essential self. What stories rise in the blessed turning of fall?" Let us sing this, let us sing deep listening into our being with a hymn, it's hymn number 298, called "Wake Now, My Senses."
Poet Mark Nepo wrote, "Still yourself and listen, and soon in time the mystery will begin to speak to you through its thousand disguises as life on earth."
In the spring of 2023, I flew to Chicago to begin historical research for my master's thesis at Meadville Lombard Theological School. My daughter, who grew up in this Unitarian Universalist congregation and who also enjoys history, came with me as my research assistant. We had 9 boxes of archival material in front of us, which contained letters, reports, and newspaper articles from all the UU congregations in Florida. And we needed to get through them in just 2.5 days. I really didn't know where to start. My initial plan was to look at how other Unitarian fellowships in the state were started and to do a comparative study with our own here in Lakeland. But as historical research goes, my goals changed. That happens when you stumble upon what you didn't know existed in the past. So imagine my daughter's delight when she stumbled upon an old folder labeled Lakeland, Florida, in a dusty box of archival materials. Imagine us together opening the folder and being transported back to 1920s Lakeland, 30 years before this Unitarian fellowship was founded, and discovering that there was indeed a Universalist movement here that we did not know about. Imagine that through these 100-year-old letters of two passionate Universalist women, that the mystery begins to speak. As we read the letters together, the mystery began to speak of faith, love, joy, and hope, and also of struggle, frustration, conflict, and of the inability of some people to not know how to listen deeply. The mystery that arose from the reading of those letters revealed the story that I'm sharing with you today. Bertha Stites and Flora Gentry had a vision to build a Universalist church right here in Lakeland. Last week, I mentioned a man named F.B. Bishop who came to Florida in 1923 on what he called his Florida Crusade, declaring that the people here needed an evangelical movement because many Universalists are going into Florida to live, and so many are spending the winter months here. And he found Lakeland to be one of the most desirable places in the state. Bishop described his week in Lakeland as a revelation and an inspiration. He found the people were more than cordial, and he wrote about the wonderful orange groves hanging heavy with fruit, the fragrant blossoms, and the bathing beaches and the golf links that the area offered. He presented a series of sermons to those interested in starting a Universalist church. Reverend Bishop claimed his trip a success. He reported that a new Universalist society was started in Lakeland with Mr. F.B. Langley as its president, Mrs. Bertha H. Stites as vice president, and Mrs. Flora B. Corning, she hadn't yet married John Gentry of Gentry Morrison Funeral Home, as secretary-treasurer. Bishop wrote all about it in the association's publication called The Universalist Leader. If we were only to read the published material, we might not know that, unfortunately, the Lakeland Universalist Society Bishop's team envisioned did not get off the ground in 1923. So what happened? Well, the 100-year-old letters tell us the story. Flora Gentry penned a letter to Reverend Roger F. Etz, who was the secretary of the Universalist General Convention, that's what they called their association at the time, in May of 1927, reflecting on the challenges they faced in 1923. She explained to him that on February 18, 1923, the Lakeland Universalist Society was organized, with F.B. Langley as president and myself as secretary and treasurer, and insofar as Mr. Langley was concerned, that settled the matter, as he never called a meeting of the society or showed any interest in it from that day to this. Flora wrote that she did not have Langley's address and that he had moved to Gainesville after the establishment of the society. What had been a hopeful start ended up being a disappointment. But it didn't end there. Flora and Bertha were too persistent and lived their faith too enthusiastically to stop after one failed attempt. That dusty old folder that we found in the archives had letters from other people in it too, mostly from the men who worked in Boston at the top level of the Universalist and the Unitarian associations, because long before we joined in 1961, we'd been doing a dance together. And there were other sources that I went to for clues about the Lakeland Universalist story. Publications from the Universalist Convention that contained a lesson for Universalist youth about prison reform, written by Bertha Stites. An Ohio newspaper called the Marion Star wrote all about Flora and her 2-term presidency for the Ohio Women's Universalist Missionary Association. And I spent hours, one of the best rabbit hole adventures I've ever been down, on newspapers.com, reading articles from Lakeland's local newspaper, which was called the Lakeland Evening Telegram at the time, about the social lives of these 2 women, because that's what they wrote about in the newspapers back then, about Bertha's very busy work life and community outreach activities, and of course, if you were here for my sermon last spring about Bertha's fun and entertaining column that she wrote herself with a Florida cracker accent under the pen name Uncle Henry, in which she advocated for the betterment of our little city and for women's issues of the time. She knew, pretending she was a man, that she'd have a better chance of being listened to. Reading letter after letter, the lives of these 2 incredible Universalist women started to speak to me. And my task was to put all of these letters and articles together on a timeline and to listen, to deeply listen, so that I could tell their stories and resurrect their vision. Their vision, centered in an all-embracing Universalist love, began to unfold as I wrote the pages of my thesis. I realized that their vision was too important to stay buried for another 100 years. Because what if these women had successfully built a Universalist church in 1920s Lakeland? That was one of the biggest questions I asked myself over and over as I pieced together this story. What if? What could Lakeland be like today? Let me take you into this story so that you can listen deeply, so you can wonder with me, what if? Let me take you into this story so that you can listen to a vision that needs to be resurrected and become a part of our own vision 100 years later. The Universalist spirit was present in Lakeland before the associations in Boston ever realized it. It was present before Reverend Bishop even came down here on his Florida crusade. And that is because one woman, Bertha Stites, that's S-T-E-I-T-Z, Stites, arrived in Lakeland in 1910 and was already putting her values into action. It seems relevant to our current political discourse to mention that Bertha did not have any children of her own. And whether or not she had a cat, I cannot say. But I can say she possessed the spirit of a strong and determined woman who cared for all of God's children. Bertha Stites was very well known around town, and it's no wonder because she worked hard to build a welcoming city. Bertha did everything from write for the local newspaper, start the Lakeland Women's Club, now known as the Junior League, which also housed the beginnings of a library, and it seems as though she even convinced her brother-in-law, Thomas Bryant, who is the same Thomas Bryant of Thomas Bryant Stadium, to purchase the land for the city's public library. Bertha traveled the state for social work conferences, advocating for child welfare. She wrote for the state women's club's newspapers, and she worked with the Highway Beautification Department. A 1930 Tampa Times article labeled Bertha a busy bee after they observed her busily answering questions in the friendliest manner from tourists as the tourist guide for the city of Lakeland. Bertha Stites loved to welcome everyone to her town. And in the 1920s, she was working to build a Universalist church with her friend and co-Universalist Flora Gentry. In 1915, before coming to Lakeland, Flora Gentry, then Flora Corning, was the president of the Women's Universalist Missionary Alliance in Ohio. This organization was connected historically to the Women's National Missionary Association of the Universalist Church, which is recognized as the first organization of lay church women in the United States. This association was largely responsible for spreading universalism throughout the country and abroad. One scholar has argued, without the contributions of this vital women's organization, Universalism would have had much less impact. At the same time, Universalist women were empowered by their work, learning that they could indeed make a difference in the world. At an annual convention of the Ohio chapter of the WUMA, Flora gave an address to the meeting as president of the organization. In her address, Flora focused on increasing membership throughout Ohio and thus their missionary work. She proclaimed, "The growing church is that which gives itself unreservedly to the extension of its faith, and the appeal for missions is the appeal for the self-preservation of the church." Flora called for loyal cooperation and asked the women present if they had the vision. She ended her charismatic address with a big spiritual and ethical question. Are you ready and willing to make the sacrifice if need be, that we may do our duty to ourselves, our organization, our church, and our God? This is the appeal. I leave the response with you. The next day, the Ohio WUMA re-elected Mrs. Flora B. Corning as their president. Empowered by her work with the Ohio Universalist women, Flora brought her vision and vigor for the Universalist faith to Lakeland. Flora was especially passionate about forming a Universalist church here in Lakeland. As she said in one letter, she has nowhere else to go and no other faith that she wants to be in. After the unsuccessful 1923 effort to establish a church, Flora and Bertha continued to do what they could to keep the Universalist spirit alive, which was sustaining local meetings of the Women's Universalist Missionary Association that they themselves started here in Lakeland. The Universalist Yearbook lists Flora as the local chapter president from 1924 to 1930. And a 1924 Tampa Tribune blurb reported that at their March meeting, plans for the organization of a study class in liberal religion were formulated. And Gentry delivered an interesting talk about the purpose of the organization, and as she had as the president of the Ohio chapter, she urged that the association aim to serve not merely its denomination, but the community as a whole. So what if Flora's vision for serving the community as a whole, with the life-saving message of universalism at the center, had been realized? What could Lakeland look like now? Flora and Bertha must have picked up a great deal of interest and momentum from these women's club meetings, because the archives contain a series of letters in 1927 between Flora, Bertha, and the associations that provide details about the women's efforts to get support for the establishment of a church with a full-time minister. Most of the letters to the associations were written by Flora. Flora described Lakeland to the associations as an all-the-year-round city as much as any northern city. And she claims that many of the people who had moved down here were of the liberal faith. She wrote to Reverend Roger Etz at the Universalist General Convention, "There are enough permanent residents to justify placing a man here full-time." She means a minister. And should this be done, as liberal as she was, she still wanted a man minister. "And should this be done, we feel confident things will move." But it's not, though. That's another story. They had female ministers. "A number of families have been inquiring when we expected to open a Sunday school, which seems encouraging." Indeed. Flora expressed a sense of urgency to secure a minister by September 1st and to open a Sunday school by the 1st of October. Otherwise, these children will start in elsewhere when it will not be so easy to interest them here. Flora's tone of concern and urgency is apparent. But was the association listening? Not really. Reverend Etz explained, "We are handicapped here, as in so many other places, by the lack of financial support for denominational enterprises. It is possible that we shall be in a position in the fall to start off with the right kind of man for that work." But the thing is, the Universalist General Convention was giving thousands of dollars to the St. Petersburg Church, which was in the midst of constructing a new building, and to the Jacksonville church, which was actually struggling terribly with its attendance. And Flora knew this because she had spent a great deal of time in St. Petersburg since arriving in Florida. So Flora also wrote to the American Unitarian Association because they too were participating in the building of the St. Petersburg Liberal Society and helping the Jacksonville church. Not to mention, it was well known that the Unitarians had more money than the Universalists anyway. In one letter to Reverend George Patterson, the secretary of the AUA, Flora complained because this was not the first time she wrote asking for help. She wrote, "It is perhaps difficult for you people there to realize the exact situation here. We have a considerable number of liberal church people here, but coming here and finding no church of their faith here, they have gone into other churches." Clearly, Flora was frustrated. She and Bertha had a vision. They had been successful in building the Women's Association and garnering interest from the liberally religious around the city of Lakeland. But it seems as if they were being dismissed by the men at the associations. The men in charge, the men with the power to help and nurture and support, were clearly not listening to the women in Lakeland. That is clear in the letters. Even though the women in Lakeland tried to explain to them what they needed to keep their vision alive. Now eventually, at the beginning of 1928, this is a year later, the Unitarians finally did send some money for a minister, and they sent a minister. But this wasn't without a heck of a lot of behind-the-scenes deliberation between the associations and even with the meddling minister at the Orlando Unitarian Church, who seemed to just want a piece of the pie. But none of these conversations that the men were having involved Bertha and Flora. None of these conversations even mentioned their names or the work they had done to build what they had built already. Flora had been writing letters for almost an entire year to the associations, when finally, Reverend Patterson at the AUA wrote to Reverend Etz that, well, he had decided he'd give them some money just to test out their desire for a church. She'd been asking for a year. To me, that is clearly him dismissing her. It's almost as if he didn't even read her letters. Why not? Here's what we know of Reverend George Badger at the Orlando Church and the president of the AUA at the time, Samuel Elliott, that was Patterson's boss. Well, we know that they were blatant misogynists, believing that what the liberal movement needed was more resolute men and not more women. And we know this because these were the words they used in the letters they wrote to one another. And so the men failed to listen to the women. They failed to recognize their outstanding community building work, their passion for their faith, and their vision to spread the good news and the good works of universalism throughout Lakeland. They failed to recognize that religion flourishes where women are present. They did eventually send a minister. The problem was the Great Depression had just hit, and the members couldn't come up with their share of the money that they had pledged to pay. And to add to that problem, the minister they sent, the Reverend Thomas Terrell, apparently did not hit it off with Flora Gentry. And he blamed her for the failure of the embryonic church. Reverend Terrell left and went to Tampa. I listened as deeply as I could to Flora Gentry as I read her letters, and I could only imagine the devastation she must have been feeling. She had been building this liberal church community in Lakeland for at least 5 years. She had been writing letters to the associations for at least a year until they finally acknowledged her and sent a minister, and then they blamed her for its failure, acting as if she had only just asked them for money and a minister on a whim. The men at the associations were in complete denial of their contribution to the problem and the failure of a Lakeland church. In 1929, a year after this all fell apart, Reverend Patterson from the AUA actually had the nerve to write to Flora again, requesting money for the remaining amount of Terrell's salary. He implored, "You will remember that it was at your urgent request wired to us that we assumed 2/3 of the burden upon the assurance that the local people in Lakeland would take care of 1/3. He acknowledged that the Universalists could not make a financial contribution at the time, that the venture was not successful, and that the Depression had a tremendous economic impact. However, he still did not feel that the local people had done their part. He wanted to hear from her about what they would do to fulfill their obligation. Flora couldn't, or perhaps just wouldn't, reply. She had a member of her former congregation, a man named E.M. Lewis, reply to the AUA. And Lewis included a short history of the Lakeland situation, briefly explaining that what the local people's work was they formed a committee, they held business meetings, they did financial planning, they paid guest ministers, and they rented a building. Lewis recalled the attendance growth of the Universalist Society in Lakeland as initially quite strong. Lewis described the society's beginning with only a few individuals who wanted to hear sermons different from what was preached elsewhere in the city. However, the group quickly gained traction with an average of 60 attending each week and a high attendance number of 350, which far exceeded Jacksonville's attendance and possibly even St. Petersburg's. Ministers from other Universalist and Unitarian churches in Central Florida had filled the pulpit. The Lakeland leadership appointed a committee to secure a regular meeting place and to ask for support. Lewis reported that they had been successful. But as the Universalists and the Unitarians delayed action in promising funds for a permanent minister, commitment from the local people waned. As Gentry had warned, members left to attend other congregations. The individuals committed to forming a liberal Lakeland church watched potential members walk out the door and not return. And the people who were left and had pledged to pay Terrell's salary could not do so, as they had lost their money when the Depression hit. If one listens deeply to Lewis's letter, the disappointment is quite apparent. And that is the letter that ends the archival letters for the 1920s, 6-year effort to build a liberal Universalist church. It's not the end of the story, nor is it all of the story. There's so much more. But it is the end of the part of the story where we can ask, what if? What if deep listening had been a cultural practice instead of not inviting women to the table to share power and build community? What if Bertha and Flora had been able to build a big Universalist church here in Lakeland, here in a state where we still have to fight for the rights of women and of poor people and of trans folks and of people of color and immigrants? What if people hadn't left and gone to other churches where different, perhaps even drastically different and even dangerous beliefs are held? I don't know what Flora did after 1930 until her death in 1943 at the age of 75. One can only hope she continued her work with the other Universalist women in town and that she was happy. I do know a lot about what Bertha was doing before, during, and after 1930. I think she's in every newspaper in all those years. And as I mentioned earlier, she was working in Lakeland and all over the state, putting her Universalist values into action. And Bertha changed this city. We have a beautiful public library because she convinced her brother-in-law, who listened to her, and purchased the land for it. We have beautiful buildings on Lake Morton that were built for the women's clubs. And the Junior League still carries out the good work that Bertha started in this community. They have coordinated the World Reading Festival, a clothes closet at a local high school, and the Learning Resource Center, which provides tutoring services. They founded the Polk Museum of Art that sits directly across from the public library. They even organize the Lakeland Christmas Parade every year, an event that brings the whole town and more together. I bet Bertha Stites would love that. A line on the Junior League's website reads that they are tackling tough problems with compassion and determination. And one cannot help but think that this may have been the motto for Stites' own life. And so it seems to me that although the men at the Universalist and Unitarian associations did not listen, someone listened, deeply listened, and Bertha's vision lives on with us today. Bertha Stites passed away in 1970 at the age of 87, and she was, in fact, one of the founding members of this congregation. But that's a story for another day. So here's where I land with all this. Mistakes were made and opportunities were missed. Even in the history of this faith that we hold so dear, a faith that really does have so many moments we can be proud of. But this story, the story for us as Lakeland Unitarian Universalists, has been lifted up out of the archives in Chicago and put back together here in Lakeland so that we can pick up the broken pieces, listen deeply to the sorrows that are sung to us, and carry forward a legacy of love. What did you hear as you deeply listened to the story I told today? I know you weren't sleeping, right? Did you hear your Lakeland religious ancestors, Bertha and Flora, calling to you, sharing their vision for building this faith here in Lakeland? Did you hear the future calling to you, letting you know that what you do here in this lifetime of yours does indeed make a difference? The practice of deep listening allows for us to open up to the mystery of time, of space, of love, of spirit, of life, and to the mystery and the vision that each one of us carries within us. May all of us and our visions of a Lakeland that embraces a radical and welcoming universal kind of love be deeply listened to. Thank you.
Our closing words today are to deeply listen and be deeply listened to by Reverend Emily Gage. May we open our hearts and minds to one another and the world. May we let ourselves be changed by the stories around us. May we deeply listen and be deeply listened to and be held in silence and love. And so may it be always be. Please rise in body and spirit and join us in singing closing hymn 1051, We Are.
We are
rises and sings to the universe who we are. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. Child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are.
We extinguish this chalice, but not the light of truth, the warmth of love, or the fire of commitment. These we carry into our hearts and out into the world.